Hello, and welcome to Applying the New NCAA DEI Review Framework to Create Cultures of Belonging. My name is Leah Coretti. I'm principal of the Intercollegiate Athletics Consulting Firm Threefold Group, and I've been working with the Office of Inclusion on developing this new framework resource for the membership. I'm very pleased to join you today for this session, and we've got Amy Wilson with us today to talk about the origin of the resource. I'll be taking you through a brief tour of the resource, and most importantly, we're excited to bring you a panel of experts from NCAA inclusion committees, including Dr. Elise Alley-Joseph, Dr. Marco Barker, Reagan Hill, and Noreen Morris to talk about implementing effective reviews on your campuses. So I noted that we'll start today with a quick review of the resource, its origin, how it came to be, what is included in the resource, and then we'll move on to the highlight of today's session, where our panel will share their thoughts on the importance of this work, how to make this review meaningful, and overcoming barriers to success. We'll end the session today talking about where we go from here in terms of giving members access to the resource and how it will evolve over time. So let's get started. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Amy Wilson, Managing Director of the NCAA Office of Inclusion, to share with us the origin of the resource.
Leah, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amy Wilson, and my pronouns are she and her, and I serve as the Managing Director at the Office of Inclusion. Leah, I want to thank you for you and your colleague Azure Davey at Threefold Group for all your time and effort to help us manage this project and to move it forward. It's a very important one. And I want to thank, you've already mentioned their names, but I have to say it again, Dr. Alley-Joseph, Dr. Barker, Commissioner Morris, Executive Associate Athletics Director Hill. We are so thankful for you being here, and not only for helping us with this session, but for all the time and effort that you give serving on one of our 4 diversity, equity, and inclusion committees. So thank you for all that you do, and we're so glad to have you here. I'm going to provide a little bit of context for this resource and then talk about some of the thinking that went into it before I turn it back over to Leah, and we can prioritize the voices of our membership who are so central to this and who will be using it on their campuses. I'll actually start by going back just a handful of years and to note that the NCAA Gender Equity Task Force was reinstated in 2014. It had existed in the 1990s and had been a very influential group that had moved forward some important initiatives related to equity for the NCAA and the membership. And it was brought back in 2014 when there was a notice of some backsliding on equity progress. The Gender Equity Task Force worked to make some recommendations to the NCAA Board of Governors, at the time called the Executive Committee. One of those recommendations acknowledged that around 2010, in Division I, NCAA certification process ended. And that certification process included a diversity, equity, and inclusion review related to minority student athletes, related to gender equity. And once that was no longer required, there wasn't a mechanism to be able to, to require that. So one of the recommendations the Gender Equity Task Force put forward was that all 3 divisions should take a look at how are they doing in this space and encourage them to enact some legislation if needed to remedy this. Divisions 2 and 3 looked at that recommendation and noted that they had a institutional self-study in place that included components of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Division 1, however, recognized there isn't anything here now, that certification is gone. And so Division 1, it did go through Strategic Vision Planning Committee of the Division I Council, and through the process that we know our legislation takes, this was approved by the membership and legislated. So we are now in a position where Division I schools and conference offices will do a diversity, equity, and inclusion review once every 4 years. The due date for schools is fall of 2023, so about 15, 16 months away. The due date for conferences is fall of 24. So we've got some time there before the attestation is required. I will note that since this legislation has passed, that we have had many requests from the membership. We need help. please, a resource, something to give us some guidance here. And so we've heard you, we've listened. Some of you have helped with this. As you've reached out to ask for it, we've asked for your feedback on what would be useful, and we certainly appreciate this. Couple of things I'll say about the resource before I hand it back to Leah. It is purposely comprehensive. So when you look at it, you're thinking, wow, this is 13 or 14 pages long. We know it's long and we get that. But we wanted to recognize that our schools across Division I, and we also want this to be useful for D2 and D3, have different missions, they're different sizes. They also, all of you are at different places in your evolution of your DE&I work. So we wanted to address what this looked like in a comprehensive way, knowing that you will voluntarily use this resource as it is useful to you and in ways that best fit your needs. It is intentionally not prescriptive, and it is more of a guiding framework. And I'll be very blunt to say that it is that way based on very valuable legal advice and guidance that we have received. So we want to be helpful to you, but we also don't want to create lawsuits and other issues. So we've been very cognitive of getting that, getting that in the best form that we can. I will also want to note that we have had much input from the full 4 diversity, equity, and inclusion committees who have reviewed the resource and made comments. We've also held focus groups and talked to others, across campuses. That's been very useful. And in addition, we have looked at a number of documents. For example, we reviewed the guidance from Division I certification on DE&I. That was helpful. So some older resources and some newer ones. Let me give you an example. In January of 2021, the Lead One organization released a helpful recommendation document on actionable recommendations on diverse hiring. And so that's an example of a resource we looked at. And I'll say that a conference resource will be started in the fall. So we know conferences may have some different needs. This one's focused more on schools. We do know that it can be useful for conferences, but we are going to look at those specific needs. And finally, this will be a living document. We will make sure that we have regular updates to it. We will encourage your feedback. And as our society evolves, as your needs evolve, we will do our best to meet those. So I'll now turn it over to Leah, and we'll start to hear the voices of our awesome panelists. And I'll come back to talk to you a little bit more about the attestation process for this legislative requirement for Division I at the end. So thank you, and back to you, Leah.
Great. Well, thanks to Amy. And, it's been 2 years of Zoom presentations, and somehow I'm still messing things up with notes pages and whatnot. So hopefully by now you're seeing just the slide. It took me 5 or 8 minutes, but thanks to all of you for your patience and understanding. So I think really helpful is kind of all the context Amy laid out. And we'll talk specifically about release dates at the end of the session today, but I did want to share with you a preview of the structure of this resource and what it's going to look like. So at the end of the day, this is a tool to help member campuses in their athletic departments and working with their broader campus communities, examine key areas and ask good questions related to DE&I. And then, as important, to follow up and to assess contribution of current efforts to creating equitable and inclusive communities in athletics, and again, in the greater college community. We've got 3 kind of thematic words here. In terms of being thorough, Amy talked about the reason why this is a longer document. We asked people what they needed in this space, and there is some guidance that individuals are looking for as they approach this review process. So we know this is not checkbox work. We know this is nuanced work, and you will see a reflection of that in the resource. This was designed so that campuses can be collaborative in this effort. So you'll see purposeful references to working with other experts across campus and in the broader community. And finally, this is meant to be a proactive process. So while a review is distinct from strategic planning or action planning, we do provide a bridge and some prompts to move from the understanding and context created in the review to then planning to mitigate future challenges and really leverage your current strengths to create more equitable and inclusive communities. So what the document actually looks like is we've got a 4-step process. Step 1 is about identifying collaborators and creating context. Again, this is meant to be a broader effort, not just one person's job. So there is some work up front about establishing roles and responsibilities for the review process, building foundational clarity. Really important in that athletics should not be an island in this space. So examining alignment of athletics with the institution's DEI policies and statements, and then examining the scope of what athletics is doing and looking at organizational structures in athletics and the broader college or university to support or hinder this work. Step 2 is all about the data, the numbers, the outcomes. So you see a focus on looking at demographic data to examine the population of individuals in athletics and the broader campus, looking at trends of both educational and career outcomes for student athletes and staff, and then taking a look at what efforts are in place to monitor the climate and experiences of student athletes and staff. Step 3 then is probably the richest and longest step in terms of data gathering, and it's looking at how all the policies and practices in athletics impact DE&I for the community. So it focuses on hiring, recruitment of student athletes, professional development of individuals looking to advance in athletics. It looks at efforts to support your student athletes and your staff and to retain them at the institution. And then it looks at broader DEI educational efforts for student athletes and staff. And then finally, there's all the requirements and responsibilities. So in partnership with institutional counsel, there's a series of questions to frame up a look at general considerations broadly, and then the specific processes in place to meet NCAA requirements, federal, state, local requirements and responsibilities. So we've got the 4 steps, and again, they're going to outline key questions to look at. And after each step, there's that pause to assess. So there is first examination, second comes assessment. And after each step, there are some prompted questions to look at: what are we doing well in this space? Where are there opportunities to improve? And where are there items that, we just couldn't answer? We couldn't respond to these questions. It appears this item needs further study. And then you take that all to kind of the end of the process, and it's putting the framework into practice. This is way too much work, and it's way too important to just shelf this. So this is a purposeful effort to give you some structure to move from the understanding and context into the strategic planning or other action planning processes. So it's about compiling the master list of strengths, opportunities, and items needing further study. You'll need to prioritize. There will be a lot that you uncover in this process, and it's a question of looking at, where can you really focus your efforts? What are the most significant strengths and opportunities? And then to think about what are the specific ways the results of the review can help the department in its action planning, its goal setting in the DE&I space. Important that you'd come up with a plan coming out of this process and a timeline to follow up on the review itself. What needs further study? What needs to be addressed or monitored before the next review cycle? And again, to keep this off the shelf and in the conscious of the department, of the broader college, and to keep it being used for planning efforts, it's really important to communicate the findings of the review to the broader audience. And don't forget to celebrate success, celebrate progress to enhance the visibility of DEI efforts on campus. So again, we're looking at 4 steps. We're looking at opportunities in each of those 4 areas to first examine key areas and then assess the extent to which existing efforts are contributing to creating diverse, equitable, and inclusive environments in athletics and the broader community, and then moving again from the framework into practice here with this final piece. So that's what the resource is going to look like. Again, it'll be released online a little bit later this summer. And probably really importantly, now we want to turn to our panel of experts and talk about what does it look like and how can we offer advice to our members about conducting meaningful reviews. And so in just a moment, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves, and consistent with one of the prompts we have in step 1 in the setting of context in the review work, we've asked each of our panelists to reflect on, why is this work important, or what is your own why behind supporting effective DEI reviews on campus. So we're going to start with Dr. Elise Ali Joseph.
Kokelia, thank you. Halito, Chimachukma Sahochifoyap Elise Ali Joseph, Chatasia. Hello, everyone. It's good to be with you today. My name is Elise Ali Joseph. I'm an enrolled member of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. And I'm also an assistant professor in the Applied Indigenous Department at Northern Arizona University. And I also serve as the faculty athletic representative. My personal and professional work looks at how sport is a form or vehicle of empowerment for Indigenous peoples, particularly youth. And this can be access to education, it be connection to culture and language, for economic opportunity, for health empowerment. So this has been the basis of my work. Ever since I stepped on campus as an undergrad, I played tennis and I stepped on campus and I was the only Native American student athlete on campus. And I think when we look at some of our student athletes, we unfortunately still see that happening today. Moving through to when I'm talking to coaches and they've told me I'm never going to recruit a Native athlete again because they had one bad experience. But most importantly, listening to the amazing success stories and life experiences of our student athletes and how sport really is a form of empowerment when we use it correctly. I also serve on the Minority for Opportunity and Inclusion Committee at the NCAA, and also the chair of the newly formed Social Justice Work Group. And then I'm also a founding member of the Indigenous Athletic Advancement Council, where we try to kind of disrupt the colonial structures of athletics and higher education and create and sustain more spaces for our Indigenous athletes, staff, coaches, administrators, etc. So, this is extremely important because I think we need more representation and voices, especially those labeled an asterisk, right? When we don't have the numbers to deem significant. And also these reviews will provide historical context and contemporary voices to more communities, athletes, coaches, administrators, etc. So thank you for being here. We look forward to sharing this space with you today.
Great. Thanks to Dr. Ali Joseph. I'm going to move on to Dr. Marco Barker for his introductory remarks.
Thank you so much, Leah. And like Dr. Ali Joseph, I also wear multiple hats. And so I have the great fortune to serve as the Vice Chancellor for Diversity and Inclusion at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, where I serve as the Senior Diversity Officer. I am also a member of the NCAA Board of Governors Committee to promote cultural diversity and equity. And so certainly in my Vice Chancellor hat, I have the responsibilities of thinking through how do we lead and facilitate opportunities and develop policies and practices and protocols that create a more inclusive and equitable climate. And then certainly my role as a member of the Board of Governors Committee is to work with our Board of Governors and examining, endorsing, recommending practices and policies that certainly make diversity, equity, and inclusion more of a reality for the NCAA. I would say that when it comes to thinking about frameworks that can help guide reviews or help guide our institutions towards greater equity, greater inclusivity, for me, it's really important. And thinking about athletics as a part of our institutional culture. And so I am certainly personally invested in thinking through how do we work with athletics as opposed to being in conflict with athletics towards creating institutional change. This structural change has to happen together, and so we have to be moving in the right direction, moving in the same direction if we are to do this work. And so I am looking forward to today's conversation and really thinking through, again, as someone who is located centrally at the institution, how do I best work with athletics? At the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, we've recently established a dotted line report with our executive associate athletics administrator or diversity officer in athletics to my office. And so this is creating opportunities for us to think about opportunities for collaboration, for coordination, addressing challenges, as you can imagine, as well as thinking through how do we both together leverage the resources and strengths and talents that we have in athletics and across the institution to, again, move towards institutional transformation. And so, again, I think this review, this framework provides an opportunity for campuses to do just that.
Great. Well, thanks to Dr. Barker. And we're already hearing a lot on our themes of collaboration and the importance of looking at your institutional structures. So I'm going to turn it over to Reagan Hill for the next introduction.
Hi, everybody, and good afternoon. My name again is Reagan Hill. I'm the Executive Associate Athletic Director, Senior Women Administrator, Deputy Title IX Coordinator. I'm our ADID for our institution sports supervisors. So just as many as my colleagues here on the call, we wear a lot of different hats and in this space. So my role with DEI consists of overseeing our United in Gold initiative, called United in Gold, gold standing for growing our leaders in diversity, which focuses on community engagement with law enforcement, outreach for underserved communities, and education and celebrations that are recognized throughout the school year. We have a pledge within United in Gold that focuses on 9 pillars: engage, vote, serve, learn, speak, listen, act, share, and support. And all staff, student athletes, and coaches sign a pledge at the start of each year. We really do have a top-down approach here at Charlotte, and that's all due to Chancellor Gaber, who recently formed a new position for us, which is the Associate Vice Chancellor and Chief Diversity Officer housed on campus. I have a dotted reporting line to the Chief Diversity Officer's office and serve on the DEI Council for our institution. DEI is also embedded in our university strategic plan, in which the athletic department's strategic plan has to be in alignment with. So I also assist with our department's D&I committee that's composed of student athletes, athletic department staff, faculty, and staff from campus to make sure what we say we're doing is getting done. And our director for the Office of Academic Diversity and Inclusion serves as our chair. Related NCAA committees, I serve right now most recently as chair for the Walter Beyer Scholarship Committee, as well as our Committee on Women's Athletics. For me, this review is important because DEI is a focus throughout our full strategic plan, not only for athletics, but for the institution. And now every year we must review with each team and department unit within athletics, as well as departments on campus. This allows us to see where we're not getting the job done, but also focuses on a deeper look at how we can get it done. It's been a collaborative effort with our senior leadership, various faculty and staff that we collaborate with on campus. But we also know at this institution that this is going to be an ongoing work for us for years to come.
Great. Well, thanks to Reagan. And there was a lot in there, but I will kind of pinpoint Reagan's comment about review work allows her to see what they are doing and what they're not doing. And both of those things are incredibly important. So we're going to turn it now to Noreen Morris for an introduction. And before I do that, we had gotten a question in the chat about, is this for all divisions? And yes, this resource is for all divisions. Obviously, as Amy said, each school will use it differently. And you might feel some of that at a smaller college. You may use the resource a little bit more selectively. Noreen's here today to talk to us from her perspective on NCAA inclusion committees. And as a commissioner, she gets to think about supporting individual members in their work. And then eventually we'll be producing a related resource for conference offices. So Noreen, please share your introduction.
Great. Thank you, Leah. And thanks to everyone who's joined us today for this important panel. As Leah mentioned, my name is Noreen Morris, and I am the current commissioner of the Northeast Conference, a role I've held for the last 12 years. And in that role, I have been intimately involved in trying to enhance and support DE&I initiatives, both at the conference level and the campus level. In 2019, the NEC adopted a new strategic plan, which has 4 goals. And the 4th goal being specifically focused on DE&I initiatives and programming. So over the last number of years, we have developed a comprehensive set of conference-wide initiatives that involve educational programming and resources. It includes ongoing digital content to promote our student athletes of color and underrepresented student athletes, as well as the affinity months. We continue to create DE&I. We have a DE&I conference-wide committee, but we have a number of advocacy groups as well that are conference-wide. And as part of the role of the conference office is to try to collaborate with our conference peers. And so we've been very successful in creating, in particular for our female coaches and administrators, we've have 5 conferences that have collaborated together over the last 5 to 6 years to provide professional development just for females, coaches and administrators. We just had our last one, our 4th one at Army in May with over 290 attendees. So there's a way to collaborate not only within your conference, but outside your conference. So that's from the conference perspective. From NCAA perspective, I currently serve as the co-chair of the association-wide NCAA Gender Equity Task Force. My co-chair is Judy Sweet. In that role, we helped, as Amy mentioned early on, we helped develop the once in 4-year review that was ultimately adopted at the Division I level for institutional and conference DE&I reviews. The task force also works directly with the NCAA Board of Governors CPCDE. You win a prize if you can tell me what that is, but that would be the Committee to Promote Cultural Diversity and Equity. And I also serve as the chair of the NCAA Division I Strategic Vision and Planning Committee. And that committee works directly with the NCAA board on all equity related issues. And we also are the liaisons to the board for the CWA and MOIC. And so in both of those roles, I was able to help advocate for and implement that Division I once in 4-year review. And we'll continue to work with the NCAA to help develop the conference resources, as Amy mentioned earlier. So, you know, as you can see, my why on why do we need the DE&I review is to make sure that we have the structure in place to provide our conferences and institutions the ability to make DE&I a part of their foundation, that all decisions made at the conference and campus level should take into account the impact on and the enhancement of DE&I initiatives. And it shouldn't be just a once in 4-year conversation. It should be, as others have noted, an ongoing review and evaluation. And then that review will help you chart the course for the future. So again, thanks for everyone for joining, and thank you, Amy and Leah, for putting this together.
Great. Well, thanks to Noreen and the rest of our panel. We heard that, you know, we've got leaders in the space. We've got individuals who are really engaged at the national level. And I think we heard consistently kind of the importance of this work being purposeful, setting up structures for future success, and to enable others to be proactive in creating more inclusive environments for our students and our staffs. So I want to throw out the next question to our panel. And, you know, we talked about the fact that this work, it can be, I don't want to say that it's hard, it's really important. And it's really significant to ask the right questions and do the work. And this is not kind of quick checkbox sort of activity. So we wanted to get some advice from this panel about making the review a meaningful experience so that it will live on and so that it will benefit students and staff in the form of plans and changed environments. So I want to start with Reagan Hill and get her advice to our attendees, again, about making the review a meaningful experience.
Thank you, Leah. Yeah, the department evaluation is going to be necessary and important, but the biggest thing that I can say and advice is the engagement of your chief diversity officer, if you do have one on campus, or if you have a multicultural center to collaborate with. We also have here an Office of Identity, Equity, and Engagement, as well as an Urban Education Collaborative. So all of these offices are included. but also a supportive and intentional athletic director goes a long way in these efforts. Education needs to be a shared responsibility for the athletic department. The one thing that I tell all of our staff, coaches, and student athletes, I cannot be the only one doing the work and helping educate. We all have a responsibility to ourselves to educate ourselves around topics and events that are going on, and that it's okay to have the hard conversations as well. I know at times people don't want to have that. We've had to talk with teams, we've had to talk with coaches, we've had to talk with administrators just to make sure we're on the same page and creating an inclusive environment for our student athletes and a belonging system. And if you guys think back to when the Title IX attestation was put forward, it made sure that we collaborated with our campus partners, and this is going to be the same thing, and it's going to be pretty easy to follow if you take the framework that they put out for you that will be listed on the NCAA website. Get your folks on campus involved. And again, the more people that you do have involved with creating programming and having a chance for open and honest dialogue with asking your teams, coaches, and staff what they would like to see, it's going to create a easier buy-in to the programming that you provide. And then at times you're still probably going to see people on the fence, not too sure about what they want to do when it comes to taking a deep dive. But as long as the majority see the vision and that this adds to our student athletes' overall experience, when the student athletes are truly feel they accepted for who they are, their performance is going to go up. Same with your staff and your coaches that are within the department. Nobody has to hide from anything. But I also encourage everybody to just take a look at the document. The resource is great. And again, Amy mentioned this before, we had a lead one committee that I served on with several colleagues, probably on this call and in the NCAA community that created the white paper that will help assist in this space. And there you'll see that work throughout this document. So that's what I've been able to do as we reshaped and revamped our strategic plan here. I'm taking a look at those things that we put in that lead one document was the first guiding. Now that we'll have something from the NCAA, it's just going to package it all together. And again, our chancellor, starting at the top, is holding all of us to the fire to make sure that we're doing this work in our space and creating this environment for our student athletes, staff, and support areas within the athletic department. So I can't stress it enough. Utilize it. It's going to be very helpful for everybody.
Great. Well, thanks to Reagan. And I think, to lead with the importance of kind of who you engage, some senior support, and then also that individuals involved in the review process might just be champions for programming later on. So Reagan, thank you for getting us started. So we'll turn next to Dr. Marco Barker for his advice to our members about conducting meaningful reviews.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are a few sort of top of mind items to consider as you're thinking about reviews. Certainly one of those is ensuring that your review is grounded in actual data and evidence-based assessment or data. So you want to be careful that you do not rely on what's understood. That's just how we do it, right? Or we already do that. I often say that inequity exists within ambiguity. So just being really careful that you actually have evidence of what you are attesting to. I think also that where there is not data available, to be sure to note those gaps in assessment. Dr. Ali Joseph talked about earlier, there are such low numbers of Native and Indigenous student athletes. And so thinking about other ways to get input and other perspectives, find ways to ensure that everyone can get access to the data, that everyone is being informed by data that is emerging from a review or what you have. And then also ensure that data is not only representation. So makeup is a really important data component, but not the only one. There are other data sources like student athlete career placement, retention, really to disaggregate that data and looking at intersections, spending and resource allocation. So where does money get allocated? We sort of already do that in athletics as it pertains to sports, but also thinking about that as it pertains to DEI. And also climate surveys are another data source. I would also say that in thinking about a review, we often think about in reviews that we want to involve minoritized individuals to be a part of these processes, to be a part of groups and committees and task forces. that is great having voices, but you want to ensure that as you involve other identities, that they are not tokenized, right? So they are not just part of a process just because of who they are, but also because of their expertise. So while cultural perspectives are extremely important, you want people to be there for their contributions and not just merely representations. There should also be a level of research that is happening, right? So in cases that, again, that you are not relying on individuals of different identities to represent perspectives, but that you've done your own research about different cultural perspectives is another key point to really think through. Another key piece about reviews. Reviews often can lead us to think about creating programs for groups or programs for communities, which are not bad, but you want to be careful that these efforts are not set up to position people as at a deficit, that you're really approaching this work from an anti-deficit lens. And so in doing that, so that as you're thinking about creating programs, you're really thinking about, are we getting to the root of the issue? Oftentimes, the root of the issue is the structure. Either it's the structure, it's the climate, it's processes, it's policies. And so it's not always about creating a program for individuals, because they can often assume that individuals are lacking something. So you want to be really careful about how you think through that. In the same way as you're thinking about this review and thinking about hiring processes, right? And so really thinking through that, how are you setting up so that you are doing full reviews of candidates? And again, where the process might be the issue. So in the process, are there issues with bias or the description or the interview process itself? Lastly, I would say that, and this has been reiterated over and over again, as much as possible, connecting this work to the broader institution. I think you'll hear from all of us, everything from cultural centers to key faculty, that you want to be really thoughtful that you are making these connections. And certainly thinking through ways in which you can counter this sometimes historical culture of athletics to be its own isolated entity. And so I think as much as you can think through how you have these contact points, I think the better off you're going to be in terms of doing a review.
Great. Well, thanks to Dr. Barker. And I was taking some notes there, and I love the line about inequity exists in ambiguity. And so, we talked about when the review was coming together, do we want you to look at the impact of your policies and practices in athletics first, or do we want you to look at your data, not just the makeup of different populations, but also the trends and outcomes that are seen by different populations and intersecting identities? And we ended up putting that first. So it's about setting context. It's about looking at demographics, outcomes, et cetera, and then moving on to look at the impact of policies and practices in athletics on the environment and the community. So really appreciate that, along with the points about, really framing the work from an anti-deficit lens, and again, that importance of collaboration and structurally reaching out across the institution and engaging experts. So the very first step in this whole process is to think about who can engage in the review, and it is led with kind of these, who are the information experts, who has the content that you need, in addition to making sure different perspectives are represented, but it really leads with that content expertise. So thank you to Dr. Barker for that. Next, I'm going to move on to Dr. Ali Joseph for her advice to our members about conducting meaningful reviews.
Yeah, thanks again, Leah. So I just want to first reiterate a couple of things that my colleagues so eloquently stated. And when I do DEI work, these are things that I keep in mind. And sometimes it's just a little shift in language. Like, instead of saying having the hard conversations, right? Let's have these real conversations, because some of us have been having these hard or real conversations for a long time. And then also buy-in, like to have people buy into this work and these processes. How about we say have people invested, or make it intentional? And I like to say, make it our heart work. It's coming from the heart, because it has to be, while it's important to have, yes, top-down leadership, it has to be interwoven in the fabric of the athletic department. And every single thing we do, we have to be thinking about inclusivity. And then 3 things that I think are integral in keeping in mind when we're going through these reviews is, again, moving away from that deficit approach, right? We know it's there. We know there's a lot of things that are not working. but how can we look at what is working and how can we build upon the abundance of the protective factors of the communities, the student athletes, the coaches, the administrators that we're working with, right? And then also we're trying to both create and also sustain spaces. And so yes, we're creating these spaces of inclusivity, but there's spaces that are there that people before us, the keynote speakers that we've heard through this inclusion forum have created spaces. So how can we help sustain those spaces, to allow our student athletes to feel safe, represented, sitting at the table, because we know that feeling safe and included helps with athletic, academic success, mental well-being, etc. We know this. And then also data is so important, the numbers are so important, right? So, but then how about the and so what about the qualitative work? So real life experiences of our student athletes. And so those are kind of the 4 things that I really look at while looking at this review. And then I also want to quickly touch on the importance of, again, our community and campus resources. Of course, I'm at FAR, so I'm going to, promote the importance and inclusivity of our FARs. And I think I'm an easy one because I do DEI work. It's in the fabric of everything I do. But I think our FARs, even if they're in STEM, even something not created to DEI at all, have resources on campus. Faculty know faculty on campus and can point you in the right direction. Get your intercollegiate athletic committee comprised of faculty and staff involved in this process. So ask questions, ask your FAR to help guide this process as well. And then also the athletic diversity inclusion designee. I serve on the MOIC, and we're the ones that instituted and implemented this position on campus. And I think it's being highly underutilized, this position. And I know ADIDs had a session yesterday, so I hope non-ADIDs were even able to attend, because I think it's extremely helpful to hear the role of the ADID. And this position is appointed to do this very work, right? It should be someone who knows diversity, who knows inclusion, and know how to push this work forward and make it hard work, make it not a checkbox. So please, I think that's so important to include the ADID in the conversation. Have ADIDs go to SAC meetings to get included, to get involved with student athletes, connect ADIDs across your conference, talk about what's working, what's not working, etc. So again, as Dr. Barker just said, we have so many resources on campus that can really help with making this review a meaningful process and outcomes.
Great. Well, thanks to Dr. Ali Joseph for those comments. And it was kind of interesting. Dr. Barker told us to approach the work from an anti-deficit lens. And I was thinking about that in terms of people and individuals. And I think what I just picked up from Dr. Ali Joseph is to also apply that to our structures and our institutions. There are resources there. There are things that are working there. And let's look to make sure we're using those not only in the review, but in leveraging strengths coming out of the review process. So build upon what is working, look to create and sustain and acknowledge kind of the work that has happened before you. And also the language matters. So framing this in terms of this is important work. These are real conversations. These are real analyses, and to not kind of set up a framework that this is an insurmountable or particularly hard task. It's important and it's real, and it can be really meaningful. So we're going to turn to our final panelist for this question and ask Noreen Morris to share her advice with our participants here on conducting meaningful reviews.
Great, thank you again. So I'm going to play off some of what the other panelists have talked about. I would completely agree. It needs to be a campus-wide collaboration, engagement, all sorts of constituencies on your campus. The one thing that I didn't hear specifically addressed that I'll focus on before I get to some more conference ideas is that the review, you really need a timeline. You need to conduct the review over a period of time that permits you to manage all of the steps that the previous panelists have talked about. So you can't wait until the last year of the once in 4 year review to start thinking about the DE&I review. That's a 3-pronged approach. You need diversity, equity, and inclusion, and you need to have a timeline that allows you to collect the data and the materials that the other panelists have talked about, the ability to assess those materials, engage campus constituencies, after evaluating, create plans to address areas of improvement, and then have some sort of public presentation of that final review and the recommendations that come out of that review. So that's not a 2-month process. That should be technically a 4-year process, and you're working to the final outcome, and out of that 4-year review. And they don't all have to be done. You can do diversity, equity, and inclusion. They're all intertwined, but you might have separate timelines depending on how you want to work on your campus. So I would just say, make sure there's a timeline attached to your review and that everyone understands the timeline and there's someone who's holding people accountable to that timeline. From a conference standpoint, I would say you can utilize your conference to assist with the institutional reviews. And what I mean by that is, I would suggest that your conference have DE&I as a standing agenda item at all levels. So from the presidents, athletic directors, senior women administrators, faculty reps, that there's a standing agenda item to talk about what's happening on your campuses around DE&I. You can share best practices around education. You can share best practices on how you are going to frame your DE&I review. So you can share with each other. You don't have to create the wheel. You can learn, okay, this is actually working very well on someone else's campus. That's a great idea. Let me try to incorporate that in our campus. And as part of that, rely on your conference's DE&I committee to help maybe fine tune some of those best practices and create some templates for your institutions to utilize. This framework that the Ncaa is creating is fabulous, but maybe there's a way that your conference DE&I committee can help pare that down a little bit and say, here are the main goals that we need to focus on. Make sure you're hitting those goals and then use the Ncaa resource to support that. And that way you take something that's very comprehensive, allow it to be utilized and understood on a campus from a broader perspective, and then the committees can dive in and utilize the Ncaa framework. And then I would say finally, as the institutions work through their reviews, ask the institutions to share within your conference, what are the lessons learned? Where are they finding that they may be falling short in certain areas? They don't have to share all of the detail about where they're falling short in details, but you can certainly see if there's some themes that are rising to the top for all of your institutions. And if everyone's having difficulty in one area of DE or I, that you can potentially do some conference-wide initiatives, some conference-wide educational platforms or programming to help the entire conference to move forward and to be better based on the reviews that you're conducting. So I would say for sure to utilize your conference in a way that's supportive and that can help maybe push the envelope in certain areas and create some resources to help your institutions can conduct the review. And then for the conference review itself, so not only does each institution have to conduct a DE&I review, but now conferences will be asked to do the same. It's as Amy noted at the beginning, the conference review is not due until the fall of 2024. Again, that work needs to start sooner rather than later, and it needs to follow the same framework that the panelists talked about with the institutional. It's got to be driven and supported by the commissioner and the conference's board. It's got to be conference-wide collaboration and engagement and collecting data from your institutions, both quantitative and qualitative. And it also has to be done over a period of time that allows you to properly assess the outcomes of that review and the the outcome of the review and the areas of improvement then should be shared with the conference so that you can work collectively to create initiatives or programming to address those areas that you need to enhance. So again, I think conferences can play a key role in your institutional reviews, as well as institutions play a key role in the conference reviews.
Great. Well, thanks to Noreen. And we're moving now into our final question, and this will be our speed round. So for each of our panelists, I'm going to ask you to really hone in on one of your barriers. And for our participants, this last segment is to talk about barriers to success, and most importantly, how to overcome them. So we're going to go back to Noreen to kick it off here, and I'm going to give her a second to gather her thoughts because she had more than one, but I'm asking her to pick one barrier, and again, her advice for overcoming those as we round out here the last 10 minutes of our session.
Great, thank you. Oh, yeah, I'm not muted, am I now?
No, okay. You're good.
I'm good. I would say the first barrier I had was just a bigger picture lack of support by a president, athletic director, commissioner in trying to engage on the DE&I review. And I would say that there's a couple of ways, solutions there is. One is to utilize the Nsa resources that already exist and that presidents in particular should be aware of, and that's the changes to the Nsa Constitution, both in principles F and G in the newest Constitution. The Ncaa Presidential Pledge, in which we've asked our presidents to pledge to supporting DE&I initiatives, as well as the Nsa mission and principles that are outlined within the Ncaa bylaws. And certainly the Nsa Inclusion Office, they have incredible resources on the Nsa website. So highlighting those resources and providing them to those people who can help you advocate to the president and or commissioner. And so those stakeholders, they've been noted before, but your faculty rep, your DE&I, campus, Title IX, campus, ADID. So certainly utilizing the resources that already exist and highlighting those and trying to get advocates to push the need at that highest level.
Great. Well, as we start our transition to our next panelist, I do want to draw our attention to one of the questions that came in the Q&A box, and it's really framed around the fact that there's a tendency in athletics to turn these types of reviews into athletics feeling that it needs to kind of display its level of performance. Look at all we do. So if any of our panelists have any advice on making sure this remains educational and useful as compared to like a PR piece, please include that in your comments as well. And we have talked a bit about collaboration, but there is a question here about a role for the human resource department on campus in this work. So if we don't hear about that from our next three panelists, I'll come back to it at the very end, but I'm going to turn now to Dr. Ali Joseph for her number one barrier and the tip to overcome that.
Thanks, Leah. So I would say there, of course, a lot of outside barriers, law, policy, etc. But personally, I think we can be our own biggest barrier within athletic departments. And that comes from not knowing the communities that our institution is on and the history of our institutions. And so we need to know what communities our student athletes are coming from and our communities that our student athletes are going into. We need to know the history of our institutions, whose land it's on, how to honor, respect the political, cultural, and spiritual places that we perform athletics on. And we need to know how also to bring our local communities into these conversations. So we talked a lot about, we have a lot of campus constituents, right? But we are also, our institutions are surrounded by so many other resources. And so how can you bring the community that you're serving, right, into these conversations and help with these reviews? Because I think then it will be meaningful, then it will be hard work, then it won't be a checkbox, then it won't be a showcase. It's actually impacting not only our student athletes, coaches, and college campus, but it's impacting the local community. And really that's the heart of diversity, equity, and inclusion work, when we can be inclusive and not just siloed in our university and our athletic departments.
Great. Well, thanks for that, Dr. Allie Joseph, and connecting it again to moving beyond the performance side of this. I want to turn to Reagan Hill now for her barrier and her advice for overcoming.
Yeah, I mean, Amy mentioned this earlier, Elise just mentioned it. We have state laws in place for many of us that a lot of times we want to do education that's mandatory for a department, and with laws now and legislation, we get a little pushback, or we have to get creative within it. So and then there are also some barriers within that, is pushback from your own coaches, student athletes, possibly parents and donors, especially when you're celebrating a historical moment or ethnic diversity celebration within your athletic department. There's calls that are made sometimes, but my biggest solution, as long as your department understands their core values, their mission and vision, and stay the course, it's going to be the biggest. It's going to be the biggest thing of it. You cannot get away from your core mission and values when you're doing this work. We also have to lean on our colleagues at other institutions to get ideas for our own campuses. What we've done here, and this speaks to HR, we created a DEI policy within our athletic department, and for us, that helps set the expectation for not only our student athletes, but also everybody that works within. And we had to work with our legal office, our Title IX office, and the HR department just to make sure the language was correct that we were using, that when they sign off on it, there could be some ramifications on the back end of it. And our HR director was actually very supportive of that we created and put out there. But we also have to make sure we all have these strategic plans that we do every year, or every 5 years, every 10 years. We need to make sure DEI focuses on all facets. And we've said that before, that we can't just create a strategic plan and then leave this out and then bring it back in when we feel it's necessary. It needs to be the framework throughout the whole strategic plan, so we know what to go back to and ask those questions, what to measure, qualitative or quantitative. And then it's also, again, back to the policy that we have, and then the expectation, and then having it printed out there of what we're doing. It's going to make us all accountable through the training and education part of it, and it doesn't become that checkbox model. I've told people before, colleagues that I've talked to, it's probably been the hardest year because we get a chance to do the work. But the hardest thing is not going back to that checkbox. Did we bring a speaker in? Did we cover this? And then that's it. There's layers to it, and we all need to work on those layers. And I know we have presidents, we have chancellors, we have athletic directors on this call, and commissioners. Again, these folks need to be intentional as well. And when they don't know, is to ask those in the industry that are doing the work and being recognized for it, and ask how they're getting it done. But they cannot be afraid to walk into a space that's not comfortable for them. We all have to own what we don't know and continue to learn. And as you mentioned, leadership starts at the top, but it's also all the way through. It's down to our student athletes and anybody that's working within the athletic department. We all have to be a part of this.
Great. And Reagan, that was a really good thought about really this review process is all about learning. So kind of appreciate the close here. So I'm going to ask Dr. Barker for his quick barrier and tip, and then we'll have Amy do the last minute of close.
No, I would just say, to answer the question about how do you think about ensuring this process is one that is authentic and not performative. I think it's going to be really important that you align all the offices and units within athletics with this effort, right? So we know that athletics, you may have a program that has its own marketing department, its own HR department. And so really thinking through how to align those offices within athletics, but also across the institution. And so, so that there is very clear expectation setting about what this process entails and what the end results are. And so I would just say involving everyone within the leadership of athletics on what the heart of this process is meant to do. And then just ensuring that you always go back to that expectation, you go back to that core core focus and belief that this is intended to really transform athletics to being more inclusive and more equitable.
Great. Well, thanks to Dr. Barker and to all of our panelists for their advice and their insight today. We have come almost all the way to 3:30, so we will turn it over to Dr. Amy Wilson to close our session.
Leah, thank you so much. And I appreciate you moderating and all the work that you have done and that we will do together. Elise, Noreen, Marco, and Reagan, you are amazing leaders in this space, and we're so glad to have you here today and prioritizing your voices. I'll make 2 quick points in this last minute. Number one, for those of you who are thinking about how are we going to tell the NCAA that we've done this review, some of you I know have already done it and want to tell us. We are working with colleagues in academic and membership affairs and in governance to set up an attestation process for later this fall, so that if schools want to go ahead and attest, it's the president and the AD this fall, you may. It is required for schools in the fall of 2023, and then the process would be open again, right? So you're not required to think about attestation for another 15 months or so. So just know that more information is coming, and we're trying to make this as easy as possible so that you're going to the same place that you do for other attestations. So more to come. And then lastly, I'll share. You all wondering, okay, we saw the 4 steps. Where is the resource? I'm holding it. I have a prop here. It's got our new inclusion forum branding. I don't know if you can see it here, but what I'll say is that we are in our very last stages with our publication people of just going through it, getting it ready. And we will have it posted this month. We will. And in fact, we're likely to, have it by the end of next week. So we're going to get it on our inclusion website. We'll also find other ways to communicate with you about the resource. It is a living document that we will continue to enhance and improve based on your feedback. So we want the membership very engaged and involved. With that, I'll encourage you to fill out a survey with this session, encourage you to go to a next breakout session. And also we've got Candace Parker coming up this afternoon. So we'll finish strong. But again, thank you for attending today. Thank you for all the work that you will do on this important review. Again, that we want to make available this resource for all schools. So thank you, and we'll see you in the next session.